under her and watched the doctor dither about. She seemed to have 100 things to do and 100 things on her mind. She stand for a second, staring into the air, murmuring to herself, "Okay, now, all right, first I need to look up." But then she would dart over to an enormous book and shuffle through the pages. After a second or two, she'd suddenly set the book down and hurry off to the kitchen, where she would take a bottle of liquid or jar of powder down from a shelf and measure some of it into a pot. Or she would dash out to the garden and come back with an armload of onions. Or she'd vanish out the back door and appear again with a sheaf of dried stems or leaves. It was hard to tell what she was doing, or if she was really accomplishing anything at all. Then she would come back to Poppy and spoon some medicine into her mouth, or put a cold, damp cloth on her forehead. "What is that enormous book?" Lena asked her. "Oh," said the doctor. She always seemed a little startled to be spoken to. "Well, it's about medicine. A lot of it is useless, though. You look up infection and it says prescribe antibiotics. What are antibiotics? Or if you look up fever and it says give aspirin. Aspirin is some kind of painkiller, I think, but we don't have any." "We had aspirin in Ember," said Mrs. Murdo, rather proudly, although I believe it had nearly run out by the end. "Is that so?" said the doctor. "Well, what we have is plants, herbs, roots, funguses, that sort of thing. I have a couple of old books that tell me which ones to use. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't." She ran a hand through her short hair, making it poke out on one side. "So much to know, and so much to do." Her voice trailed off. "I suppose your son is here to help you," said Mrs. Murdo. "My son?" The boy, Torn. "Oh," said Dr. Hester, "he's not my son." "He's not?" said Lena. "No, no," the doctor said. "Torn and his brother, Casper, they're my sister's boys. They live with me because their parents were killed in an avalanche years ago. They were in the mountains on an ice gathering trip." "And the boy has no other relatives?" asked Mrs. Murdo. "He has an uncle," said the doctor, "but the uncle didn't want the trouble of bringing up boys. He offered to have this house built for me if I take them in. So I did." "What is an avalanche?" Lena asked. "What are mountains?" "Lena," said Mrs. Murdo, "it's not polite to ask so many questions." "I don't mind," the doctor said. "I forgot that you wouldn't know these things. You really did live underground?" "Yes," said Lena. Dr. Hemster scrunched her gray eyebrows together. "But why would there be a city underground?" Lena said she didn't know. All she knew was what was in the notebook she and Dune had found on their way out. It was a journal kept by one of the first inhabitants of Ember, who told of the 50 couples brought in from the outside world, each with 2 babies to raise in the underground city. They thought there was some danger. They made Ember as a place to keep everyone safe. "It was that long ago, then," said the doctor, "before the disaster?" "I don't know," said Lena. "I guess so. What disaster?" "The disaster that just about wiped out the human race," said Dr. Hester. "I'll tell you about it some time, but not right now. I have to go and see if Bert Webb's infected finger is getting better." "Can I ask you one more question?" said Lena. The doctor nodded. "Why is this place called Sparks?" "Oh," said the doctor, smiling a little. "It was the people of the last truck who gave it that name, our 22 founders. They were among the very few people who survived the disaster. For a while they found food by driving around from one place to another in the old towns, using cars and trucks, and still had a sort of energy making stuff called gasoline. Gas for short." "Cars and trucks?" thought Lena. "Gasoline?" But she didn't want to interrupt, so she didn't ask. When food and gas began to run out, they decided it was time to start a new life somewhere. They found one last truck stop that still had gas. They loaded it up with supplies, food in cans and boxes, tools, clothes, blankets, seeds, everything useful they could find. Then they drove east, out across the empty lands, staying close to the river. Right there, the truck broke down. When they opened the hood, a great spray of sparks shot up out of the engine. So they decided to settle on that spot and name it Sparks. The doctor stood up and looked around for her medicine bag. It turned out to be a fitting name in another way. Sparks are a beginning. We are the beginning of something here, or trying to be, the way a spark is the beginning of fire. "But fires are terrible," said Lena. "Terrible or wonderful," said the doctor, who had found her bag behind a chair and was heading out the door. "They can go either way." Lena never did go down to the plaza that day. She didn't think Doom would worry. He knew Poppy was sick, and he figured out that if Lena probably stayed with her, she would go and look She would go and look for him tomorrow, she decided, and find out what was happening to the people of Ember. Late in the afternoon, Lena went outside and sat on a rickety bench in the courtyard of the doctor's house, waiting to see if anyone was going to make dinner. It seemed unlikely. The doctor was off treating someone's toothache, and Mrs. Murdo was up in the loft with Poppy, who had started crying an hour ago and still had not stopped. A door opened and Torrin came outside. He sauntered over to Lena and stood in front of her. Your sister is probably going to die, he said. Lena jerked back. She is not. Torrin shrugged. Looks like it to me, he said. Looks like to me she has the plague. He sat down on a wooden chair where he could stare straight into Lena's face. He was wearing a sort of undershirt. It was white and looked like a sack with holes for neck and arms, and his thin legs stuck out from a baggy shorts of some kind of material. He had combed his hair so it stood up like a tuft of grass at the top of his forehead, making his long, narrow face look even longer. I don't know what you're talking about, Lena said. You don't know about the three plagues, said Torrin in a sort of exaggerated surprise. Or the four wars? You've never even heard of the disaster? I've heard of it, said Lena, but I don't know what it is. I don't know about anything here. Well, then, I'll tell you. You can't go around being so ignorant. She said nothing. She didn't like this boy's superior attitude, but she wanted to know everything there was to know. She would let him tell her, but she wasn't going to ask him to. It was a long time ago, he said. He spoke in a precise, teacherly voice. There were millions of people in the world then. They were all geniuses. They could make their voices travel around the world, and they could see people who were miles away. They could fly. He paused, waiting, no doubt, for Lena to be amazed. She was amazed, but she wasn't going to show it. Besides, he was probably lying. She just nodded. They could make music come down out of the air. They had thousands of smooth roads and could go anywhere they wanted really fast. They had pitchers that moved. He waited again. He took a few apricot pits from his pocket and rattled them idly in the palm of his hand. All right, she would ask. What do you mean, pitchers that moved? Didn't think you'd know that one, Torrin said with a tight little smile. They were huge pictures, taller than a house. They were called movies. You look at a wall and see a story happening on it, with voices and other sounds. How do you know all this? Asked Lena. She thought he could just be easily making it all up. We learn it in school, said Torrin. They teach us a lot about the old times so we don't forget. Have you seen a moving picture then? Of course not. You have to have electricity. There hasn't been any for a long time. He chucked one of the pits at a bird that was about to drink from the water dish. The splash scared it away. We had electricity. We had it in Ember until it ran out. We had street lights and lamps in our houses and electric stoves in the kitchen. For a moment, Torrin looked dismayed. But did you have movies? He said. Lena shook her head. Anyway, what does all this have to do with my sister? I'm about to tell you if he would just let me. The important tone came back into his voice. So there were all these billions of people. But there got to be too many of them. They messed up the world. That was why the three plagues came. But before the three plagues, there was four wars. Once again he paused and looked at her in that infuriating way, lifting his thin eyebrows. Just tell me. Don't look at me like that, she said. You don't know about the four wars? No. War. What's that? A war is when one bunch of people fight with another bunch, when both of them want the same thing. Like, for instance, if there's some good land and two groups of people want to live there. Why can't they both live there? They don't want to live there together, he said, as if this was a stupid question. Also, you could have a war because of revenge. Say one group of people does something bad to another group, like steal all the chickens. Then the first group does something bad back in revenge. That could start a war. The two groups would try to kill each other, and the ones who killed the most would win. They would kill each other over chickens? That's just an example. In the four wars, they were fighting over bigger things, like who should get some big chunk of land, or whether you should believe in this god or that god, or who got to have the gold and the oil. All of this was enormously confusing to Lena. She didn't know the meaning of God or gold, and she didn't know what he meant by oil. You mean, she said, thinking of the jars that had once been stocked in the storerooms of Ember, the kind of oil you cook with? Torrin rolled his eyes. You really don't know anything, he said. He flung the rest of the pits he was holding at the three little red-headed birds pecking at the weeds between the bricks, and the birds scattered cheeping. This was really beautiful, valuable oil. Everyone wanted it, and there wasn't enough of it to go around, so they fought over it. They hit each other? Much worse than that. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and a low, husky voice told Lena about the weapons they had in those days, the guns that would let you kill people without even getting near them, and the bombs that would flatten all whole cities at once. They set the cities on fire all over the world, and then afterward came the plagues. I still don't know what a plague is, Lena said. A sickness. The kind where one person catches it from another person, and it spreads around so fast you can't stop it. We had one of those, Lena said. The coughing sickness. It would come sometimes and kill a lot of people and then just go away. Well, we had three, said Torin. There was the one where you wither away like you're starving to death, the one where you feel like you're on fire and you die of heat, and the one where you suddenly just can't breathe. No one knew where they came from. They just rose up, swept over the whole world like a wind. Lena shuddered. She was tired, all at once, of listening to Torin, who took such pleasure in describing horrors and saying words she didn't understand. So, Torin said, the 4 wars and the 3 plagues, those together were the disaster. When it was finally over with, hardly any people were left. That's why we had to start all over again. He stood up and brushed away a twig that was clinging to his shorts. We don't have war anymore, he said. Our leaders say we must never have war again. And besides, there's no one to fight with. But if we ever do have to, we would win, because we have the terrible weapon. The terrible weapon? Said Lena. What's that? But just then Mrs. Murdo came out the door with Poppy in her arms. Lena jumped up and ran over to her. Is she better? She's a little better. Poppy lay against Mrs. Murdo's shoulder, her eyes dull. Why, nah. Why, nah, she said in a small voice. Lena ruffled her fine brown hair. Torin cast an indifferent glance at Mrs. Murdo and walked away across the courtyard. The gate clattered behind him. Poppy doesn't have the plague, does she? Lena said. A plague? Certainly not, said Mrs. Murdo. Whoever gave you that idea? That boy, said Lena. That horrible boy. That was a little bit of chapter 4, little surprise, chapters 5 and 6. Wow, a lot happened in that chapter. So I'm wondering what you were feeling about these chapters. Me and Jupiter would like to know. And I'm wondering what happened to Torin's brother Casper, and what did they call it? He said they had the terrible weapon. I'm wondering what that is too. I hope that Poppy is feeling better. I'm hoping that Lena, we'll see if Lena, how she finds out about the Pioneer Hotel and how everyone is doing over there. And let me know how you guys are holding up at home. All right, I will send another video tomorrow. Bye, guys.